Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Not too long ago, we did a version of this reel. A lot of folks thought that they were the same reel. They're not. This is a Mitchell 324, and we had done the Mitchell 204. And although it shared kind of a similar body style, there's a lot of differences in this reel. So I thought what we would do is we would take one of these apart. We'll show you how it's made, what the differences are, how to service it, and well, how to give it a second chance to go fishing again. This one's tight. That's about the only issue with this reel, and that usually means that it's been sitting around a while, and well, it's had the grease dry out on it, and kind of lost some of its mechanical abilities because of that. This reel was made in France. I had a question on the 204, which was also made in France, because they thought maybe it was made in Japan, and that's a fair question to ask, because these reels came out in the late 1970s, and well, by then a lot of production was migrating to Japan and Korea, and so it was a fair question to ask for sure. This reel is very similar and characteristic to the 300 in terms of the fish that you would be going for. Similar line capacity. You have a spool that removes with a click button. Inside, after that, it all is different than the 300, but if you were fishing a Mitchell 300, this would be a reel that you would certainly be capable of using. And well, let's get started on it. We'll show you a little bit about it. You've got the prongs on the axle shaft here. Those prongs grip the inside of the spool here, and that's when you push down, there's a little cone that compresses these to enable you to take that off. Well, to get started, you want to remove the handle, and it's best to do that now rather than later, because you're going to want to remove the main gear. And in order to remove that main gear, well, you're going to have to take the handle out at this point. Otherwise, you're not going to have the resistance to turn the handle later. There's a cap that's a shield for the body, and it's a screw-in handle. I noticed that there's a little bit of, I'm not sure if that's rub or just old grease that may have leaked out, so let's see if we can polish that off right now. Seems to be a little bit of old grease, and surprisingly, just something like that, the cap with some old grease in it, could slow the performance of the reel down. Well, while I'm doing this, I want to remind you that if you like these kinds of videos, that I would recommend you subscribe to the channel. I appreciate each and every subscriber that is out there, and it's become quite a forum to show you how to service reels, to talk about reels in general, maybe their manufacturers and so on, time frames, what makes them the same and different, and so on. And if you subscribe, well, you'll see when I'm posting the videos of those the various reels, and you'll get to learn a little bit, and you'll get to appreciate the fishing reels. And maybe you're starting that fishing reel service and repair as a hobby. This is a great reference point. There's hundreds of videos in the library. You saw that I took the screw out of the side plate here. Now you just lift up and pull down. There's a little tab here that goes inside that spool, and you can see why the reel is performing as poorly as it is. Do a close-up of that. It's just old dried grease that stops this reel from doing the best it can do. And so what we want to do, like we do with most of the reels, is we want to give that a good cleaning. We want to get that old grease out of there. This isn't like an automobile where you just check the kind of check the engine oil level and add as needed. You really do want to get the old stuff out of there, because as the reels are cranking away, well, there's contamination that gets in those reels. Freshwater, also salt water, regardless, the contamination starts to carry some dirt or sand or dried out or micro-sized salt, and well, that's just going to be a problem later on for the reel. So get rid of it all, start anew. Okay, one of the things you want to note is that pictures become important when you're servicing a reel. Sometimes people find themselves coming to my videos because, well, they didn't take pictures, and for whatever reason, as they continued the service or went to reinstall or did whatever it was, something didn't get installed properly. Well, the best way to remember how to make that go correctly is to take pictures. And here's a prime example. This crosswind block here has a shoulder up top and a pin that goes to the top side. Very easy to flip this around, put that on the bottom, and then your reel won't work. You'll stick. So take a picture and also keep track of the pieces and parts that you take off. In this case, I use a fast food container as a parts tray. I don't care how you organize your parts, but organize them so that you know where they are when it comes time to reinstall. That's particularly valuable when you're working with a lot of small pieces and parts. Well, I just removed the axle shaft. I'm wiping off the old grease on that. If you found that there were any burrs or problems there, go ahead and kind of work them down. Start with a less aggressive piece, maybe some 4/0 steel wool or something, and then, well, if you need to, a light microfile or something probably would help you. All right, well, you've just seen I've used a paper towel to wipe off the old grease. I also use a lot of these cotton swabs in the hard to reach areas like those corners. I take that and put that into my parts tray. And well, you'll notice now that two things. One, I took the anti-reverse off. The reason for that is I didn't want to have that anti-reverse dog get in the way of any removals. And secondly, you'll notice that we can't take the main gear out without removing the top pinion gear. Well, in order to remove that, we got to remove a whole chunk of this old tarry grease here. And so I'm just using a flat-bladed screwdriver as a scraper to get that off. That's about all I use this screwdriver for, is scraping. If you have a different tool, I'd love to hear from you in terms of what you use to remove this grease. I like the cotton swabs for the most part, but sometimes in a sticky situation like this, those little hairs from the cotton start to get trapped in the reel. So I like to do as much of the cleaning as I can similar to that. I like to use paper towels. And right now, for example, I just folded it over. That won't get in my way now. And, well, when it's time to do more, like there's a hunk of dried grease that fell out over here. There's some dried grease in the case. I can just kind of start anew without taking a new piece off. Well, while I'm doing this, I want to remind you that if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments section. I do try to answer all of the questions that come in. A lot of times it's about the type of reel or the use of the reel. Sometimes it's somebody's gotten stuck on the repair project and wants to see if I can't help them out. And in all cases, I'm happy to respond. Just leave the questions in there. If you try to call, it's going to be more difficult. There's a number on the back of the video here, but that becomes a little more difficult. All right, we have a rim on this one. It's a rotor. Very hard to reach in and try and grab the rotor nut that way. So use a socket to get in there. Mitchell made a tool. It's a 12mm socket with a little bit of a screwdriver on there for other uses on the reel. But you don't need to rush out and buy that. Just have a socket that you can work that with. Notice on this one, there's a trip lever that's going to be mounted under this. Just be aware of it. I'm going to take this off now to show you. There's a metal piece and a spring in there, and that's what's controlling how this trips. So they put a shield on there so it doesn't jump out. Just be aware of that. Once you take that off, it's a good idea to hold that little mechanism over it so that you can do the cleaning on the bottom. We'll do that now. I'm going to notice there's a little more grease on there, so I'm going to use penetrating oil to loosen up some of that harder grease under there, and then wipe that down. And again, I try to keep this about as tight as I can. I really don't want to disturb that trip lever. If you do, it's not terribly hard to reset, but you usually have to take the bail off. Just going to lay that off to the side there. Now what you should be able to do, you'll probably notice that, well, there's a couple of things. There's that tripper underneath here. That comes off. I'm going to take that and put that into the piece. And now this usually gets pushed down. So clear that stud. Get that out of the way so that you can push the gear through. And there's usually a little washer on this one that won't come through the gear. So you want to push that washer up, and you can remove the washer. Oh, it's not coming out there. That's okay. Again, you want to clean the pinion gear here. I'm going to use penetrating oil again. This time I'm going to go for just a pick. I'm going to run that through each groove in the set. Get some of that old grease out. And you can see how handy that paper towel is. It gets a lot of use before it goes in the trash. But I'm also keeping that stuff off my workbench as I'm doing this. Once I've done that, I also like to take a hard bristle brush and pull through. You can see what's remained there after I got some of the heavier stuff out of the way. I like to scrape that onto the paper towel as well. Now we're nice and clean on that, so that's going to go into my parts tray. All right, now we can remove the main gear. Remember, this anti-reverse is in the off position. I just like to leave it in the off position. It's not terribly hard right now, but what may happen is you leave that in, it catches a tooth on the back of the main gear here, and then it pulls this anti-reverse dog off of its little counter here. It'll pull it right off because there's a stud here. See if we can get the stud in focus. Notice we have two springs. We have a spring that's the anti-reverse latch spring, and we have a spring here. And in case you're watching this video because that spring popped, notice the short end of that spring is mounted into the case, wraps around the stud, and comes to the back side of that anti-reverse dog. It's always important, and I know a lot of folks watch the videos because, well, they may not have understood that that thing was lurking out there and it shot off, and then, well, you kind of get stuck, right? All right, I'm going to clean that off, and then one more piece. There's just a little bit of grease up here that I want to get out of the case as well. All right, just going to use the last of that paper towel there. I'm going to set that towel aside. This is a good time while you have this stuff apart to do a little bit of cleaning on that body, because there's some spots here, like right behind the neck and up top here, that, well, they're just hard to reach when the reel is back together. So I'm using a rod and reel cleaner. I'm using Penn's rod and reel cleaner. It's kind of a cleaner and a wax. And I like to do that right now. And then with my fresh towel, I'll wipe that off. All right, that'll make it look nice when it's time to reinstall. Next up then we have the main gear. Now we cleaned a lot of that main gear, but you can see why you want to remove it. There's grease that has accumulated on the back end of this. And also you just want to make one more pass where you do your best that you can to clean all of that out. So we're going to do the same thing we just did with the other one. Now there's no clogs here, so I'm just going to use this brush to wipe down. And while I'm wiping down, I'm inspecting each of the teeth. Make sure that they're not broken or bent or anything like that. If they were, you probably would need to replace the main gear. On a reel like this, that probably would be the end of the reel. It's just not that expensive a reel. But if you have a project reel, maybe you have one for parts, well, you would probably want to grab the one for parts and replace the main gear if you find out that something got jammed in there. On a reel like this, if something got jammed in your main gear, it probably also affected your pinion gear, so you want to check both of those as you do that. A little bit of grease onto the shaft. When you grease this, you grease the teeth and the face, because that's where your crosswind block is running. You do not grease the click ratchet for the anti-reverse. Now we're going to reverse the process now. We're going to take that main gear and slide that back in. And notice how nice and easy it slid back in. This is a time where, to me, it makes sense to put the handle back on. Now you want to hold that main gear in place. So I'm going to take the handle, put that in right now. That's going to act as a clamp for the main gear. Next up then, we want to take our pinion gear, We've already cleaned that, so we want to do the same thing here. We want to grease it after you've inspected the teeth. Now, I was inspecting the teeth when I was cleaning it out with that pick before. Get a little bit of grease onto the shaft of this, which is going to go through the bushing. There are no ball bearings in this reel. Make sure that's down tight. Make sure you have that little washer that goes with this. Get the stud out of the way, and then just slide your gear back up. As I mentioned, this is a spring assembly in here. You do not need to do anything with that from a service standpoint. So just going to keep it under control. And we're just going to bring this right on. Just trying to find the right way to locate it. And that shield goes over it. Okay, when you're tight there, oops, that was an oops. This one belongs underneath. That's going to be the basis of the trip. And there's a little hole in this. Let's take this off and show you. There's a little hole here, right there. You can see where the pick is. And you're going to notice that there's a point on this one. That point belongs in the hole of that gear. All right, now we can put the rest back on. I'm going to take our rotor nut now, tie that down. And be careful as you do this now. Sometimes when you're tightening it down, this cover for that spring assembly is going to move. You want to make sure that you're nice and square with that. Take our little ratchet here and tighten that down. You can spin it at this point, and you can see that that works a whole lot nicer than it was before when it was all full of that grease and junk. Crosswind block is next. I'm going to get a grease into the cavity and onto the face. That's the only part that's going to be requiring the grease. Sit that crosswind block over the stud. Hold that with one hand. Probably should have done this earlier, but that's okay. We're going to take the brush and get a light coating of grease onto the axle shaft and pass the axle shaft through the rotor. And we need to align the hole in the crosswind block with the hole in the axle. And then we're going to grab the pin, which just slipped out of my hands. Put the pin in all the way through. And now you'll get a better view of how that works. How nice that is, right? One of the things you didn't see me do is service the bail. You don't need to service the bail on this. You saw the trip spring. If the bail is tight, the only thing you have back here is a spring. So if you want, you can just run a seam of oil where the arm intersects with that the rotor case. You can do the same on this side. This is what I call a dead end. There's absolutely no moving parts. It's just surrounded by that. But go ahead and set it. Make sure that it trips, which it does. All right, we can close this side up now. And then we'll just show you the spool. There's that slot. Make sure that you get the slot of the case inside the rotor. Align your hole for the single screw. Go ahead and put this in. So this one, by Mitchell standards, as I mentioned, it kind of lines up size-wise with the 300, but is nowhere near as complicated in the engineering and design as the 300 was. The 300 had a whole revolving series of oscillating gears and the like. All right, we're just trying to get that started. I like to start all my screws by hand. That way I'm sure that it's threading properly. Sometimes you can feel that it's starting to cross thread, and you can tell right away you want to back that off and out. All right, that's the basic bottom of the reel. We're going to turn that anti-reverse on now. Okay, before we leave the reel, let's do the spool service then. And there should be a top washer and a bottom washer on this one. We'll take the adjuster knob off. Here's your top washer. Now your top washer, it's a consolidated piece, if I remember. It's not two separate ones. I think they're actually pressed on there. But we have, like the 300, we have a winged washer with pieces that rise up that are going to be tension springs. And we have a flat bottom to it. The spool comes off, and then there's a washer below here. The washer below here is inside the case. And that's your actual drag washer right there. So all you want to do with this one is you want to make sure that your the bottom of your carrier is clean. You can reseat this. You don't have to grease those. You can. But if you do, wipe the grease off. Then we're going to insert that into the bottom of the spool. That noise, by the way, is made by this spring. So this is the clicker spring that goes around the post, has that little tag end hanging out there. The little tag end hits the ridges on the back of this spool. So when you're putting that in, make sure that you rotate that so that that tag end doesn't get caught up. On your drag top, there's one flat side. Find the flat side on the stud. Just load that down. And then we have this winged adjuster nut. That's it. That's your spool. Not very complicated. It gives you enough drag to handle the reel. Take your spool, put that back on, and then final test then. We've engaged that anti-reverse. Nice working reel all around there. Let's go ahead and make sure that it clicks, and it does. And that's it. That's your Mitchell 324, circa late 70s. And a nice dependable reel, kind of on par, but with the type of fishing you would do with the 300. We showed you what the cause was in terms of the poor performance of this reel. It was dried grease. We showed you how to clean it up and put it back together again. So I hope you've enjoyed that. If you did, please like it. And again, if you like these kinds of videos, please subscribe to the channel. To all of our first responders and essential personnel, thank you for everything it is that you do. And to all, please stay safe, stay well, and stay watching. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Have a great day.